questions raised from last week. There were some current concerns, some of you that we've spoken to and talked to about this. Apparently some very lively small groups, to say the least. I think one of the quotes from somebody was sparks flying in one of their groups. So I imagine that there were some lively groups last week, and I just want to address that, a couple of things around that for a moment. So one of the things that seemed to come up is being uncomfortable that we brought up a number of times we don't know, and there's sometimes an uncomfortable ability of saying we don't know, particularly a lot of us with our background. And when I look at that, to be honest, one of the things I have to ask myself, my role as a teacher is, hey, maybe I wasn't clear. Maybe that could be a reason why there's a lack of clarity, is maybe I'm just not clear. Maybe last week there were things that I did not handle the way I could as a teacher. So I asked myself that, and for any of that, if there were things that I presented unclearly, that's my ownership. And hey, that's what a teacher is. I learned, as many of you did almost 50 years ago, I learned the phrase about learning is an exciting adventure. And for me, that's really what it is and continues to be after 50 years. I love the learning, I love the adventure, and sometimes that means stepping on edges. So one of the things is just maybe there was a lack of clarity, and we'll try and clear some things up. So what I did this afternoon, I met with John and Jerry and Janet, and I met this afternoon just to sync up on this particular section of tonight and last week, to discuss this area, what we know and what we don't know, and just to be synced up. I think most of you know that John and Jerry work together in translation, that John and Jerry spend 6+ hours a week together in translation. I think most of you know that they actually translated 1st and 2nd Thessalonians together. So I think most of you know they work very closely together in the New Testament translation. But anyway, so we got together this afternoon to kind of sync up again to make sure some of the we don't knows, just to make sure that you recognize it's because we don't know. So here are the things from last week, if you were with us. What we don't know exactly what shook the Thessalonians so much about the day of the Lord had come. We just don't know. They were definitely shaken. They were scared out of their wits, but we just don't know exactly what it was that came up that shook them. We just don't know. And I brought that up last week. We also don't know exactly where the source came from. And we talked about that last week. It said it might be a prophecy, it might be a letter, it might be a message. We don't know the source, and we don't know exactly what the misinformation was. We just don't know. The other thing that isn't clear is we know we're talking about the day of the Lord and the coming of the Lord and the gathering together, but the timing of those events is not stated here. Now, many of you, if you know John's teachings, which I know very well, and many of you do too, John, for those who care and know, John falls on a pre-trib rapture in terms of the timing of the events of the coming and the gathering and the day of the Lord. And so as a result of that, he has plenty of commentary, if you come at it with that view of what that coming and the gathering together and the day of the Lord will be. And you can read his commentary. When I said last week, we're not going to go into it. And John reminded me, he says, yeah, I tell him that all the time. I'm not going to tell him my commentary. I tell him go read it. So he said, you can tell them to go read it if they want. So if you want John's perspective, read his commentary or his books or his teachings on that. It's very open. What we also all agreed is that there are other points of view. People have different points of view. This is one on the timing of the events. This is one where I think Jerry has a different point of view, and some of you may have different points of view. And that's what we're saying is the timing of the events of the Lord is something that's been debated for age-old timing. What I said to you last week is we weren't going to deal with the timing issue because that would take hours and hours. John and I spent an entire weekend teaching on the hope in Rochester several years ago and still didn't fully be able to talk about all the nuances of the day of the Lord and things like that. So in this particular course, we don't have the time to deal with it, but you certainly, if you want to know where John stands on that, there's plenty of things that you can go to. We're just not going to do it. So that's sort of a basis to say. I wish I could say that tonight is less of the we don't know, except we're hitting the most difficult actually section of the entire Pauline epistles. And there are other things we just don't know. And when I mean we, I mean the scholars. I mean John, I mean Jerry, I mean, I'm not a scholar, I'm just a teacher. But so there are just things we're gonna deal with that are difficult. And next week it's a little bit lighter. So yeah, I'm seeing another great research is the topics category. So absolutely, there's tons of resources if you wanted to look at what has John done or where does John land on some of these things, you can certainly do that. The one other thing I would just say, a comment came up about that I said it's comfort, but they don't see where the comfort was last week, which I thought that's a great line because, and this is the thing about that, the whole letter is comfort, and actually this whole section is comfort. But last week and this week, we're primarily talking about the unbeliever. We're not talking about the believer. We're talking about what's going to happen one day with the events of the end times with the unbeliever, and that's not comfortable. It's not comfortable for the unbeliever, but it's also not comfortable for any of us who have a heart about what's happening for that. The real comfort to the believers comes in the last section, which is verses 13 to 17, and that we're going to cover next week. So I just want you to be aware, we're still in what I would call the correction section. He's correcting the misunderstanding that they thought the day of the Lord had already come. And if you remember last week, what he said, there's two things that got to happen before that happens. There's going to be the rebellion, and there's going to be the coming of the lawless one, and those two haven't come. And so there is the day of the Lord has not come. So what he started last week, basically saying what will precede the day, these two events, all of tonight is simply we're going to expand on the rebellion and the man of lawlessness and what that means. So we're going to share the things that we do know. If you're uncomfortable with things that we don't know, I'm sorry, because we're going to go back into it tonight, but do your best. And what I love when you get back into your small groups, what does that mean? It means you have a right to be open. You have a right to have questions. You have a right to have a point of view around it. That's really what these things are all about, is you have an opportunity to share, and we're going to hopefully give you some things to think about as you do that. Is that okay with everyone? Are we okay? Okay. All right. So that's what we'll do that. So with that said, Jerry, I see Jerry, so I know we can move forward. So Jerry, we're starting here, and we ended on verse 5, but we thought we'd start again on verse 5 as a reminder. This whole section is, do you not remember that I was still with you? There we go. Do you not remember that I was still with you when I told you these things? Because it's really important to know Paul told them things that we just don't know. I wish we did, but we don't. And then he's going to go on to this whole section, Jerry, these next few verses that deal with what is holding him back. So let me just start. Let me turn it over to you to sort of tee this whole thing up with the first question, which is, what is holding him back anyway? What do you say, Jerry?
Well, I think that you prefaced it well. We're entering into what is known as the most convoluted and obscure section of all of Paul's writings. So there are going to be some tough things here, and we tackle one right here at the beginning. And what is holding him back now. Paul makes a reference to. Well, he says this because he's like, guys, I told you the answer before when I was with you. So he's now appealing to their memory. He's trying to have them recall information he shared with them when he was with them. And he says here, like, what is holding him back now? The Greek word for this is really to like restrain. It means to restrain something or somebody. And he says, what is restraining him? This is the man of lawlessness, or we might refer to him as the Lawless One. Those are just interchangeable terms. This reference here that there is something, Paul is saying there's something holding back the Lawless One. So now, what is it though? Jeff, you know what it is, don't you, Jeff?
Oh, of course. I mean, of course, I know most don't, but Jerry, I've got the inside scoop with the Lord. So Jerry, as I understand it, this has probably been one of the biggest areas of eschatological debate forever in terms of ideas or suggestions about what's holding him back now. So what are some of the things that people have postulated over the years?
Well, if I can hold off on that until we get to verse 7, because you would just know it that Paul makes another reference down here to the one who is now holding it back. There's a lot of this holding back language going on here. So if we could like hold off until we get to verse 7, I think I'll tackle it then.
Okay. Well,
I do want to mention something about the timing here. He says there's something holding back the Lawless One right now. Like presently, there is some force, or, it's probably more best to look at there's an activity. There's some activity that's going on that is preventing the Lawless One from coming. But this restraint that is happening is only going to be temporary. There is an endpoint, because it says here that he, the Lawless One, will be revealed when his time comes.
What is that about? What is his time?
Well, the Greek word here means like an appointment, an appointed time. So there's some in God's grand scheme of history and his timetable to unfold and accomplish his plan and purposes. There is some point in the future, some appointed time in the future when the man of lawlessness will be revealed. So do we know when that is? No, we don't. But as we get down below, we'll find out that it'll happen when he's no longer restrained. When whatever activity or person, as we'll see below, when they're not holding him back, he will come forth.
Okay. So we've got a timing, we've got a now, we have a future. In fact, a lot of this section, Jerry, it seems to go back and forth between present and future. What's going to be future, but then what's present, and then what's going to be future. And it does seem like we're going back and forth between present time and future time in this section.
Yep. There's something happening right now, and there will be something happening in the future. There's just these two time points, and Paul kind of contrasts them and goes back and forth between them. You're right.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, so he talks about this man of lawlessness, but then he switches and he goes to this phrase here, sacred secret of lawlessness. Now you know what a secret is, right?
Yes, that wouldn't. I mean, I bet a lot of this group is very familiar with that. Mysterion, sacred secret. But sacred secret of lawlessness? Like what is, I thought the sacred secret was a good thing. So what is this all about? The sacred secret of lawlessness?
Yeah, the sacred secret, that phrase sometimes has been coined to have a certain definition associated with it. But as is the case with language, that words usually, and they basically on principle, they only hold meaning in a context. And when the word mysterion is referring to something like the plan of God for the inclusion of the Gentiles in the covenant promises to Israel, well, that's a particular sacred secret. When God is talking about, for example, the union between a man and a woman in marriage, well, that's a different sacred secret. And when he's talking about the union between Jesus Christ and his body, well, that's also another different sacred secret. There's all kinds of sacred secrets. There's not just one. The word mysterion is usually translated sacred secret because it usually refers to some sort of religious sort of oriented knowledge. And this sacred secret of lawlessness is basically that the lawlessness here, meaning sin, wickedness, also rebellion, living against God's law, living outside God's law. That's what lawlessness is. That there is this secret, meaning there's knowledge to be understood, that it's already in effect. And Paul says that it's already at work. It's at work now. There is lawlessness at work now. And there's a sacred secret here because Paul is revealing to them, hey, the lawlessness doesn't just come in the future with the lawless one, it's already here. There is something being revealed right now in the world about the lawlessness, about people who are living against God's law. And only the one, interesting, we go from what is holding him back as a principle, some sort of activity, to now some sort of person. Only the one now holding it back will do so until he is out of the way. This he here is the one who's restraining the lawlessness from spreading too much, that he's going to continue to restrain lawlessness until he is out of the way. At that time, there's no longer going to be any restraint. There's nothing going to be holding it back. I think about, I don't know, if you were young, Jeff, and you have siblings, right?
Yes.
Yeah. You guys ever, like, in your house, sort of like maybe in the hallway, if one of your siblings were coming down the hallway, you would like barricade them and put your arms out on the side of the walls and like block them from getting down the hallway.
Just like, for fun.
Just for the heck of it. And they couldn't, and they would get upset because they couldn't go where they wanted to go. Well, I think about this, the holding him back and the restraint is basically that whoever this is and whatever they're doing, they're basically just standing in the way of the lawless one and lawlessness from just going out of control. They're basically keeping everything in check right now.
So Jerry, the suspense is killing me now. Can we talk about who is the one holding or the activity? Like who is standing in the hallway, keeping this man of lawlessness out of the way?
No, I think we're going to wait until the end of the very, very end of the teaching. Just kidding. I actually made a little slide here to try to show you some of the things that have been proposed. This right here is going to be the testimony to why you heard Jeff say, and I'm going to reiterate it, there's tons of stuff that we don't know. And it's not just us. Nobody knows it. So this restrainer. What are some of the possible identities of the restrainer? Let me see if I can get rid of that. I just made a little line on my board there. There are 15 different things that people have proposed over the centuries to try to identify who and what are restraining lawlessness and the lawless one. In the early church, they thought it was Rome. It was Rome, it was the emperor, or it was just government in general, civil government. Think about that. When government is taken out of the way, lawlessness will run wild. Well, Paul writes that the government is instituted by God in order to punish evildoers. So there might be some merit there. Some people proposed God. I don't know how that makes sense, but when God is taken out of the way, other people think that it's God's power as part of the activity that's currently restraining. Other people think it's an angelic being like Michael the archangel. This has reference to, for example, in the book of Daniel, where Michael is a restraining force who fights on behalf of believers. It could be the gospel message being preached. It could be the church. It could be the apostle Paul. It could be Satan. It could be evil forces. It could be benevolent forces. It could be the Jewish nation of Israel. It could be the apostle James. Or people just said, it's a mythical symbol and it really has no real point of reference. It's imaginary. So the restrainer, what is it? We don't know. We don't know what it is. It's something that is currently working on behalf of God to restrain lawlessness. And whoever it is, at some point, according to God's appointed time, they're going to step out of the way or be removed from blocking the lawless one, and he is going to be revealed. But that will happen at the designated time that God has appointed.
Jerry, one of the things that occurs to me in that, because it's interesting, all of these different ideas on the restrainer, which have come out over the thousands of years, and yet Paul says to the Thessalonians, what's holding him back. I mean, so he wasn't trying to be secretive. He wasn't trying to be, mysterious. They just knew it. And he's just reminding them of it. It seems here, what's holding him back, because he'd already talked to them about it. And this is just one of those many places here where we wish that they had recordings back then. We wish they had Zoom calls, because he did talk to them about it. We just don't know what he said.
Yeah.
So, well, all right. So Jerry, so it says until he's taken out of the way, this verse 8 then, the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will destroy by the Spirit from his mouth and put an end by the appearance of his coming. So whatever it is, when the restrainer is taken out of the way, then the lawless one comes. But it looks like Paul, when we talk about comfort here, immediately goes on to give the end of the story in the sense that Jesus is going to come and destroy by the Spirit of his mouth. And it brings up, so it seems like there's some comfort here. We're not left with the destroyer. We're left with Jesus, who's going to take care of business. But one of the things that comes up for me here is this whole phrase about Jesus will destroy by the Spirit from his mouth. Like, what is that all about?
Yeah, I think you are rightly pointing out, we see here that the lawless one will be revealed. And then right after that, Paul then explains his demise. But he's truncating the existence of the lawless one. It's not that the lawless one's going to be revealed, and then right when he's revealed, Lord Jesus is going to slay him down and destroy him right then. Like there's an elapsed time that is not being spoken of here, where he will have some activity. And Paul will talk about that below a little bit, and we'll get to it. But yeah, Paul is basically saying this lawless one will be revealed. There is going to be a time before the day of the Lord when the lawless one will be revealed and will do things. We'll find out later what he's going to be doing. But don't worry, because he has his own demise promised when Jesus comes. He will destroy, he will slay this lawless one. And it says by the spirit of his mouth. I don't know if that's a phrase that most people understand, the spirit from his mouth. It's I thought maybe it was a typo. It might have been from the spit from his mouth, but it's not. It's spirit.
So what is that all about anyway?
Well, the word spirit, pneuma, it has a lot of different meanings. Spirit being one of them. It can mean soul. It can mean wind. It can mean breath. It has its counterpart in the Hebrew word ruach. And there's a lot of places in the Old Testament where the breath of God does things. The breath of God like exerts a power. There are places where I remember the breath of God created the heavens. The breath of God gave life to humankind. The breath of God also will destroy unbelievers. So the spirit or speaking utterance, it's a metonymy for when somebody says something. Metonymy just meaning that another word is used in place of an idea. So here spirit is referring to some sort of a speech act, something that Jesus is going to speak, but the speaking has some sort of spiritual power with it. And I'm reminded of when Jesus in the Gospels in his earthly ministry, there are a lot of times when he would speak things and miracles would happen through the utterance of his word. He would just say somebody's healed and they're healed. He would tell the somebody who's dead to get up, not dead, who's paralyzed to get up and walk, and they would just get up and walk. Or to the storm on the Sea of Galilee, he's like, silence, be still, and the waves just stop. Like there's something powerful when Jesus speaks. And so here I think the spirit is just referring to, he's going to say something, a spiritual utterance, and it's going to carry with it the power of God to vanquish this enemy, this lawless one who rises up against God.
Well, so Jerry, this clearly is not saying, the spirit of his mouth, from his mouth, is not saying, the man of lawlessness is going to be a pushover. Why Jesus could just blow him over with a breath. This is the impact of this is power. This is talking about power that's coming from his word that will put an end by the appearance of his coming. We're talking about the power of the Lord Jesus Christ to destroy this man of lawlessness and put an end to him.
Put an end to him as well. The word really means to render useless, or to make ineffective. And it's not that Jesus is going to effective just cause him to not operate any longer. He's going to be ineffective. He's going to be rendered useless because he's going to be annihilated. Like he's going to come to an end of his activity and of, as we'll see later, his deceptive action, his deceptive schemes and everything, because he's not going to be around. He's going to be completely he's going to be executed. Jesus is going to slay him.
So again, this is not exactly the comfort part of this section, but certainly there would be comfort to people being persecuted to know that the ultimate, that persecution and all that, one day Jesus, when he comes in the future, is going to put an end to all this. There would certainly be comfort in that.
Yeah, he's basically saying that there's going to be a person who's going to oppose God. There's going to be a massive rebellion coming, but ultimately Jesus is going to have the victory, guys. He's going to have the last word here. And so I think that is the comfort. That's the pastoral concern. Is he's bringing it forward to before he now talks about everything that's going to happen with the lawless one. He makes sure that he stamps on it like, oh, and by the way, his doom is sealed.
Beautiful. Now, Jerry, this last phrase in this section, by the appearance of his coming, that didn't Paul refer to that earlier? Didn't we start with that? And is there anything here about this appearance of his coming that sort of brings these things together?
Yeah, this I see this is like a reference. If we look back at verse 1, he says his whole idea here is the coming of the Lord. That's his focus. So if we bring this down, he's doing like what's called an inclusio, where he will have a topic that he will begin, and then he will end with the same words or idea. And it's like bookending a paragraph. He starts by talking about concerning the coming of our Lord, and then here at the end, he wants to say that when the Lord Jesus comes, he's going to destroy this arch nemesis of God, and he's going to put an end to him, and it's going to happen when he comes. So yeah, those are interconnected. But it's interesting, this word appearance here, it's where we get the word epiphany, epiphania, and it just refers to like the visible manifestation, and something about Jesus's appearing, about coming into visible, tangible sight, is going to bring power. This might be a reference to like God bringing with him the glory, or sorry, Jesus bringing with him the glory of God, and the power that's along with that, because the word appearance and coming are often used synonymously. Sometimes Paul will call Jesus' coming his appearance. Sometimes he will call it his coming. They're kind of like, just depends. And now here he combines them together, maybe for emphasis, maybe to make it a more powerful statement about how he's going to come, and in his coming and the appearing of him is going to bring about the demise of the lawless one.
I love that that inclusio. Just really that he's talking about it, and then he wraps up again around that. So Jerry, if we move on to this next piece, verses 9 to 12, which is the next section, which in one part, it's it's continuing to talk about what will take place, what will take place and all. It's a continuation here. So let's take a look at this one. But we know it starts up with the coming of the lawless one. So we're now back on the future side, right? We're on the when the lawless one comes, which is going to be coming in the future after, these things, all of this. But it says, as a result of the activity of the adversary with all kinds of power and counterfeit signs and wonders. So can you talk a little bit about what does it mean, the activity? It's the result of the activity of the adversary, and then tying it into this power and counterfeit signs and wonders.
Jeff, just one question, or Jerry, what is the note that you have at the word coming? It looks like VOL. What is that?
Verse 1. That's just a.
I
verse
see.
1.
In the future.
I got you. Okay, thanks.
There you go. There you go.
Yep.
Thanks, Jerry. Okay.
Yep.
So
yeah, you're asking about the activity. Like, why is the lawless one a result of the activity of the adversary? Well, what I see Paul doing here is saying that the appearing, the being for the lawless one being revealed, that he's not just being revealed on his own, that he actually is part of a larger orchestrated effort against God. And that then comes from the working, this word activity really means the working of Satan. That's the Greek word for adversary, Satan. So the idea is that Satan and what he's doing in the world is going to be behind the lawless one and his coming. And once the restrainer, the one who's holding him back, is out of the way, then the adversary is going to be able to push him forward and empower him to do all kinds of things. He's going to be working all kinds of power. This would be miracles and counterfeit signs and wonders.
So the working, or at least part of the working, then, Jerry, is this. It's this power where he will be manifesting power, signs, miracles, and wonders.
Oh yeah.
In a big way. This is power, and yet the Greek word, and as you've translated it, is counterfeit signs and wonders. So is that saying that the signs and wonders aren't real, they're counterfeit, or is that saying something else here?
Well, we translated this counterfeit. It really, the Greek word means falsehood. These are signs and wonders of falsehood. Now, that doesn't mean that like they're just like fake signs. They're not fake signs and wonders, as though it's like a magic act. You know, if you watch a magic act, what they do is they try to do some fancy things to make you think that they have some sort of power and they're doing something magical. They have an ability, you know, to make things happen that you can't explain, because what they do is they usually use some sleight of hand or some sort of mirrors or other objects, optical illusions, things like that. And so what they do actually really isn't real. They're fake, you know, they're fake miracles, you could say, is this what a magician does. What this is not fake signs and wonders. These are real acts of power, like you said. These are things where it's having an impact in people's lives, and that it's actually something that is opposing the power of God. And they're counterfeit not because they aren't real, but they're counterfeit because they point to something not real. They point to a lie. That's why they're falsehood. You could call it, they are signs and wonders of lies, meaning that they lead somebody to believe a lie, lead somebody to see and understand not the one true God, which is what signs and wonders are supposed to do. They're supposed to testify to the power of the one true God. False signs and wonders, or counterfeit signs and wonders, testify to something else. They testify to a false God. And so that's why it's counterfeit. It's not because they're fake, it's because they're pointing to something that is a lie.
Okay, so this lawless one, and by the way, it's interesting there, Jerry, that might, I forget if it's a figure, but you know, we've just been talking about the coming of the Lord in verse 1 to verse 8, and now we're contrasting that in verse 9 with the coming of the lawless one. So this is really talking about what the lawless one will do and bring when he comes, which is, first, he's doing the work of the adversary. Secondly, there will be power. There will be power and signs and wonders. And then I see you've got this arrow to this beginning of verse 10. There's a tie-in there about, or is there a tie-in to this every kind of unrighteous deception? Is that all part of this, what the man of lawlessness will do?
Yeah, it's like two different expressions: with all kinds of power, or with every kind of power, and with every kind of unrighteous deception. The unrighteous deception can be that they're being deceived into sin, or that the way that they're being deceived is an act of sin. It's maybe it's part of both. But yeah, this is what the lawless one is doing, based upon the activity or working of the adversary, that he is going to be bringing all these different types of signs and wonders, and he's going to be working unrighteousness by deceiving people. And the deception can come from the counterfeit signs and wonders. He's basically going to be out to deceive the world. He's going to be out to turn the world away from God, for them to believe a lie, and for them to worship, false gods, for them to worship Satan.
Well, it looks like, Jerry, to that point, is it looks like the narrative shifts now to those whom he deceives, those who follow the man of lawlessness here, because that next phrase, those who are destroying themselves because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. So we've kind of moved to those followers of the lawless one, which is really, this section is going to talk about what's happening to them. It's obviously not to the believer, it's to those who are the followers of the lawless one. But here, to the audience, what it says here, destroying themselves, who are destroying themselves. So how is it that they're destroying themselves when they're the ones who are being deceived by the man of lawlessness? Like, what's all that about?
Well, the reflexive aspect of this, that the destruction, they are essentially bringing it upon themselves. They are, essentially this is saying they are responsible. They're responsible for the destruction that they are going to incur. And the reason they give is right here. This is because, this is the reason. Paul says, why are they destroying themselves? Because they refused to love the truth.
So you
go
think
ahead,
this
Jeff.
is willful? You think this is like these are not just, Joe the taxi cab driver or night person. These are people who have refused the truth, refused the love of the truth. Willfully rejecting the truth, if you will. Is that the way you see that?
Yeah, they basically, this refusing to love the truth is a phrase to say that they rejected God. They did not believe the gospel. They did not embrace the gospel. They did not trust in the gospel. They chose to reject it.
Yeah. Okay.
And this truth here is not some philosophical idea of like truth as, maybe 1 + 1 = 2. It's not philosophical. This truth is a word that refers to God's truth, which is a term that's usually used when referring to the good news of Christ, the gospel message. And so they refuse it, and what happens? Well, they're not saved, they're destroyed, and they are doing it to themselves.
So, wow. So these last two verses, Jerry, then we get to 11 and 12, talking about, again, these people. If we get, there we go. We get, so this is an interesting phrase because it says, and because of this, so because of what you're talking about, God sends them a deluding influence so that they believe a lie, with the result that all who have not believed in the truth, I can't quite get there, but took pleasure in unrighteousness will be condemned. So we'll come back to that one. But so this phrase here in verse 11, then, Jerry, because of this, God sends them a deluding influence so that they believe a lie. That's how does God send a deluding influence? That's unique. That's different. What is that? What is that trying to say there?
LIT period. Literally, the literal meaning is from the Greek is it's a working of error. God sends them a working of error, and we thought that was not very, clear what that means. So we decided to translate it as a deluding influence. So when the Greek word working, energeia, is used, it usually means something in operation, some sort of activity, or it could be an influence, something that makes something happen. And God sends them this working of error, and error is just a word that refers to being led astray or being, deluded or deceived. Now, this is an interesting statement because it seems now that God has something to do with this whole process. Whereas we just read before that it seems that the people are causing this themselves. By their choices, they are bringing destruction upon themselves because they rejected God. Well, as is often the case elsewhere in Scripture, when somebody chooses to reject God, then sometimes judgment is brought upon them. And there are places in the Old Testament and also elsewhere in the New Testament where it says God does things in judgment towards people. And I think that that's part of what this is. There is a way to interpret this as maybe what some of you might understand to be what's called a Hebrew idiom of permission. I'm not so certain that that's really what's going on here. I think more or less probably this is God's response to their willful rejection of him. And the way I would say it is that God opposes those who reject him and who reject the truth. And it is a form of judgment against them. and that God sends them this powerful influence so that they believe the lie because they've rejected God. And so then God sends them to believe this lie instead. And it's a way of God punishing sinners with the consequences of the very sin that they desire. And so if they don't want to believe the truth, but they'd rather believe a lie, then God gives them a deluding influence to believe it, that they can go and they can believe this lie.
Well, that, Jerry, and this would be a big topic. We could spend a whole hour on that topic itself, but it does tie right into that last verse that I think we'll handle tonight. But what you're saying, because verse 12 says, with the result that all who have not believed the truth, but took pleasure in unrighteousness will be condemned. And I believe that word condemned it's judged, that this is bringing the, what's ultimately going to happen. And I imagine this is day of wrath, these things, but is there will be judgment. There will be a day of judgment. So can you wrap us up on that concept and what this one is saying?
Yeah, we come off of the act of God in judgment against these individuals who have decided that they don't want to be saved. And the deluding influence, the effect that it has, it says here, with the result. So what does it do? The result is that the people who have not believed because of their own choice, rather, they decided to take pleasure in unrighteousness. They liked being deceived. They wanted to believe the lie. They wanted to live the sin that was part of lawlessness. Those individuals, because of the deluding influence, they're going to get what's coming to them, which is God's wrath. They're going to be condemned, and the punishment of God's wrath will be destruction. They will be annihilated. They will find themselves in the lake of fire and experiencing the second death.
Well, so Jerry,
Now I guess maybe we can bring it back, Jeff, is what, where does this then help the Thessalonians?
Exactly. And I think, and we can, if you could end the screen share for a
Sure.
moment, we'll go back. I'll go back there too. But again, this is quite a place to leave. We're leaving in a cliffhanger because the comfort to the Thessalonians is still, that's what verses 13 to 17 are. But this is, I'd like to read something just to sort of keep our perspective here as we wrap up, because it's all our time tonight to give you a chance to talk about a little bit. I'd like to read you from one of the commentaries. One of the major commentators for Thessalonians is Gordon Fee. And at the end of this section, we've been working on this verses 3 to 12 about Paul's response to the issue. Gordon Fee makes this comment, and I'd like to read it for you. I think it might help us. As one comes to the end of these corrective, not primarily instructive words, several reflections come to mind. First, this passage has been the hotbed of every imaginable eschatological movement in the history of the church. And that in turn has caused a large part of the church to avoid the passage with benign neglect. So on the one hand, what was intended by Paul to be corrective of a false eschatology has in turn become the basis of later competing eschatologies. And then on the other hand, because Paul's eschatological outlook and language have made some later Christians uncomfortable, they have simply acted as if it were not a part of inspired scripture. But neither of these views is fair either to Paul or to the Thessalonians. What needs to be noted from this passage, secondly, is the apostles' absolute certainty about the believer's future, despite the various forms of false teaching that may come along. Nowhere in the passage does Paul either mention or encourage heated expectation. Indeed, the passage is not about expectation per se, but about an informed understanding regarding God's own future for those that are his. Thus, the passage, which serves as correction for the Thessalonians, should serve the later church as encouragement of the highest order. How so? God can be trusted with the future. And for those who so trust him, there is an underlying certainty that they too will be a part of that future. Paul's primary point needs regularly to be stressed. If the timing of the great coming of the day of the Lord is not known, believing in its certainty and waiting patiently and expectantly for it is part and parcel of the Christian gospel, and that comes to us through the New Testament. Isn't that beautiful? We may not know the timing and the certainty. What we know for certain is our future is certain, and he is coming back. And when he does, all the promises will be made whole for us, for those, for the Christian who trust in him. And that, my friends, is a tremendous comfort. So I know we've gone a little bit late. I think we can still squeeze in 15 minutes here, though. So I'm going to turn it to Ellen for our follow-up question, and then we'll get everybody off in their group for at least a short breakout.